Okay, so sorry for the delay. I had some technical problems and still somehow my laptop is not really working perfectly, but I hope it will not be a problem in my live demo. So, my name is Schäfer. I come from a company called TNG, which does projects in the Munich area in Germany. And we are mainly doing Java projects. I'm doing that for 5 years now. And today I will talk about behavior-driven development in Java with JGiven. JGiven is a new framework which we developed about 3 years ago to do behavior-driven development in Java. So, to motivate a bit first why you should use behavior-driven development, or maybe what's the current problem with standard tests, I would like to show you a small example. And this is the pet clinic example from the Spring framework. So it's a demo application which shows you the features of Spring. And the nice thing about this example is that they also have automated tests for that. And I want to show you one of the tests they wrote. And I like the example because it really shows the typical problems that you have when you write JUnit tests. And there is a couple of them. So this is the test. And the first thing which you typically have to do if you see a new test, most likely it's some test which failed on your continuous integration server. Maybe some colleague of you wrote this test 3 months ago, and now you have to understand what the test is about, because either the test is read because maybe you have broken the production code and you have now to fix the production code, or maybe you have changed the behavior of the application and you have to adapt the test. And so the first thing is to try to understand the test. And I will try now to go through the test and maybe we understand the test. So we start with the first line. The clinic servers find owner by ID 6. So here already we have a problem. We are getting some owner by ID 6. We are not knowing whether this owner is really relevant or not, or this ID is important. Okay, but it's some owner 6. Then we get the number of pads from this owner, store it here. Then we create a new pad, give it the name Bowser. Okay, maybe the Bowser name is not important here, I guess, but okay, it's nevertheless, we see it here. Then we get the pad types, and the pad type with ID 2, and set the type of the pad to ID 2. We also don't know what the ID 2 is here, the pad 2. We set the birthday date, then we add the pad to the owner, and afterwards we check that the number of pads has increased by 1. We save everything and check it again afterwards. So what are the problems with this test? So the first thing is that the test contains a lot of irrelevant details which are not relevant for the test, because the name of the pet, for example, is not necessary in this case. That really doesn't matter. Still, maybe the pet has to have a name because otherwise it could not be stored, so we have to somehow put something there. Another thing is that there are a lot of technical details like collection types or entity utils and so on. These are technically necessary for the test, but to understand the purpose of the test, it's actually noise. And it makes it a bit more difficult to understand the test. But there are additional issues with typical tests. So I've shown you 2 of these problems. And these problems make it typically hard to understand the point of the test, and which is important. Another problem which often occurs is that you have code duplication in tests. It's often the case that even good developers don't apply the same clean coding guidelines for test code like for production code. And this often leads to the problem that you have such a test as I've shown you before, and then you want to create another version of the test, maybe slightly modify it, and then you copy the test, modify the detail. And now you have 2 tests which are slightly different, and both are hard to understand, which makes it even worse. But then there is another point, mainly that these tests can only be read by developers. So you cannot go to a domain expert and ask the domain expert whether the behavior you just described with your test is actually what is intended, what the application should really be doing. And this also means that you cannot really use these tests as documentation. And this is somehow a pity, because typically you invest a lot of money in your automated test suites. Typically, it's about 50% of your code is in test code. And then you have a documentation, actually, which is written in code, but you cannot use it as a documentation because nobody can read it except the developer. And even for a developer, it's hard because of this noise, as I showed you. So what can we do about that? And the good news is there is actually a methodology which can be used, which is called behavior-driven development. And it's actually already 10 years old and exists a long time now, also in the Java world. So the question is, why don't we use behavior-driven development if it's much better? I've shown you here a typical BDD scenario. This scenario describes the same behavior that I've shown you before in this test. So here you see this is written in a domain-specific language, so to say. Everybody can read it. You don't have to be a developer, and it's easy to understand. It doesn't contain any technical details, and the only irrelevant detail here is that it's a dog. Actually, this is also not really necessary in this case. Otherwise, you can read it, and everybody can understand it. So then we can look at the Java world and look for frameworks for BDD. And there are actually a lot of them. And they are already quite old. So JBehave is about 10 years old. And there's Cucumber, and also well known is Concordian and Fitness. And I call these frameworks the classical BDD frameworks because they base on a technique to split the scenario from the Java code that actually executes the scenario. So in Cucumber, for example, you have a plain text file. And then you write Java code to bind the text to an executable Java code. And you write regular expressions, so you need glue code to be executable. The problem with these tools is that they add an additional overhead to your tests. So you have to write plain text files, or you have to write HTML files, and you have to write a glue code for that. And if you're a developer, typically you don't want to have overhead. And in our experience, in our projects, we actually tried Cucumber because we had the problems that I showed you before. We wanted to solve them with BDD. We tried Cucumber, and after a couple of months, we actually abandoned it because it was just too much overhead for us. Then there are more developer-friendly tools like Spock, Scala Test, Scenario, and there's also Serenity BDD. The problem with these tools is that they require, except for the last one, require different language. Right? For Spock, you need Groovy. For Scala Test, you need Scala, and so on. So if you are in a Java project with a lot of Java developers, it might be a problem for you to introduce another language just to have nicer tests. Serenity BDD is an exception here. It's only also usable with Java, but it's also a quite new framework. And when JGiven was developed, Serenity BDD didn't exist in this form yet. But it has similar concepts to JGiven. Okay, so we wanted a developer-friendly BDD framework for Java. It was 3 years ago, and as a good developer, we asked Stack Overflow. And I wanted to show you because I really liked the answer. Basically, the answer was, okay, you don't need any framework in Java. You just write comments like given, when, then, and so on. And then it's basically BDD. And on the other hand, he also mentioned the framework I mentioned before. But I really liked the last sentence. And I want to read it to you. It says, I also think that the most successful BDD frameworks for Java are those that are not written in Java, since the Java language has no such flexibility for DSL or domain-specific language creation that Groovy or Scala has. So this was then the starting point for us to really try out and implement our own framework in Java. And the result was JGiven. And the rest of the talk, I mainly will give a demo. But first of all, I want to show you the 4 goals that we had when we created the framework. The first one was it should be developer-friendly, like maybe Spock or something. So it should not be necessary to have different files for your test. I wanted to have the scenarios written in Java directly. But I wanted to have this BDD form. So given, when, then form should be maintained. And also wanted to address the problem of reusability of test code. This was also something which we had in our case. And finally, we wanted to have readable reports that we can show domain experts so that we can really use what we are writing as a documentation later. Okay, so let's try it out. So, Okay, so maybe before I start, I show you the Spring Pet Clinic example. It's already here. And for that, I start the demo. And we shortly check that actually what I've showing you is actually working. And let's see. Okay, it's not working yet, but okay, let's skip that part. We just tried directly in the because I have not so much time anymore to fix that. So we have a look now at a test from the pet clinic. So this is a test I actually made up myself. It's similar to the other test I've shown you, but it's already cleaned up a bit because it doesn't rely, for example, on these magic numbers. So what the test here does is basically it creates an owner, saves it with the owner repository. Afterwards, we are searching for the owner by last name Smith. So that's a feature of this application that you can search by owners. Afterwards, we verify that exactly one owner is returned and that the returned owner is actually the one that we created in the beginning. So the first thing I will do is I will write now comments, which I then will remove later, and describe with the comments what actually the intent is. So I will write a scenario for that. So given an owner with last name and Smith, that's the first part. Then when searching for Smith, then there is then exactly one owner is returned, and finally, the returned owner is the given one. So this is the scenario which I want to describe, and now I will refactor the test so that we afterwards use JGiven, and we can remove the comments actually. So the first thing you do is in JGiven add the dependency. So there is a Maven dependency for that. I have already did that. Otherwise, okay, before I do that, I will actually show you that the test is actually executing, and hopefully this works now from the IDE. Okay, so you see the test is actually working. And first thing is you extend from a given class which JGiven provides you. That's actually not really necessary, but it provides you convenience features which you can use. In this case, we have a Spring test, so we need to inherit from the Spring scenario test. Otherwise, you would inherit from scenario test. These test classes are just really simple, so you can basically also use the rules that JGiven provides. So in fact, JGiven is actually implemented by 2 JUnit rules. If you use JUnit, you can also use it with test.ng if you want. In this case, I have JUnit. But if you inherit from the class, you get some nice syntactic sugar. So the first thing is you inherit from the class, and then you provide 3 new classes. These are actually the called stage classes, which later contains the implementation of the steps of the scenario. So I give now 3 classes: given owner, when searching, then search result. And in the beginning, it looks like this is an overhead actually, but this is exactly the way how JGiven provides you the possibility to reuse test code in other scenarios. So typically, you don't create 3 new classes for each scenario, but typically you reuse a lot of them and maybe only create one of these new classes. So now I have created the classes, and now I will replace the code with methods. So what you typically want to do. So I will write now given an owner with last name Smith. So we just create a method exactly like the comment. We now need the owner repository, which I first injected here in this test class. Now Now I need it in my stage class. So I will move this into this class here so that we have the owner repository. We have to annotate this now with JGiven stage because it's a Spring test, and otherwise it will not, the auto-wired feature will not work. Otherwise, if you're not using Spring, you don't need that annotation. Okay, so we have just moved the code behind a method, and now the method is exactly like the comment, so we can actually remove the comment. And now we can try executing the test again. Now the given owner is not existing here. That's a problem, but we will fix that later. So let's comment that out for now. And now you see the test is working just as before, but there's an additional output here, which is generated by JGiven. It's actually taken the name of the method here, and this is the title of the scenario. And next, it uses this method call here, and replaces and generates a report for that. And this is all without having any additional annotations or something like that. So it's really low overhead for you. It's basically, you have basically nothing to do except for creating a method for extract your to move the code to. It's not so nice here that we have the Smith inside the method name. So this should actually be a parameter, I would say. So let's fix that. And we add the parameter. Okay, you have to rename that. And that should be it. Let's restart it. And you see that you can also have parameters without problems. And final thing I don't like is that it's not in quotation marks. In the original report, it was in quotation marks. So let's add a quoted annotation to that. So the report actually adds quotation marks to that. So now you see that there are quotation marks around that. This is a feature of JGiven which allows you to define custom annotations and provide a custom formatter of your arguments, which is quite useful in certain situations. Okay, let's fix the next one. If you wonder what these methods here actually return, and this given when and then methods, they actually return instances of these classes here, so these stage classes. So when searching for okay, we can directly use the argument here. We're searching for Smith. I should have renamed that. Then we need the clinic service again, and we move that to the stage class, and we should not forget to add the JGiven stage annotation so that Spring works as expected, and then we can remove the comment again. And the same thing we can do now for the last one. Then exactly one owner is returned. Okay, that's not so nice that we have to write in one here. Let's replace that with a placeholder, and when we can have this here. Okay, let's import the static method. And now we have a problem because we now need the found owners variable here inside this stage, which is only existing here, actually, as a local variable. So what do we do about that? And that's a typical problem that you have when you try to refactor your tests to have clean code, because you typically have to pass around a lot of parameters. We could now return these found owners and store it in a variable here and then pass it to the next method, but then it's again an unclean test, and I want to avoid that. So actually there is a feature in JGiven that helps you here. You can just store this in a field of your stage class like that. You have to annotate that with scenario state, and after that this variable is visible in other scenarios in other stages if you put the same field here. It's like dependency injection and also extraction, so to say. And now you have access to that, and we can execute the test again. And you see now the report is completely finished. The last one is missing. I will not do it now because of time reasons, but you can imagine how that this is easily fixed like that, the other ones. And now you see here the console output, which exactly looks like the scenario I've shown before. Something like that you would typically write in Cucumber in a text file. In JGiven, it's just generated for you. Okay, the text output is something which you typically don't want to use as a documentation, because a domain expert might not want to have text as documentation. So what JGiven also provides is a HTML report. So you can generate a report, and this looks like this. I can show you here maybe the report from JGiven itself. So if you go to jgiven.org, you will see that it contains the JGiven report of JGiven, so to say, because we are testing JGiven with JGiven, and the report looks like that. It's actually an interactive report which you can interactively navigate through. So here, for example, you can look for all scenarios. It shows you all the scenarios which you have written. You can have tags in your scenarios, so you can group your scenarios by tags and show, yeah. By that you can then structure your scenarios in a useful way. And here you see you can also have attachments in your report, like screenshots and so on. And you can also search for scenarios if you want. So that is something which you would typically give to a domain expert. And typically what you do is you generate the report, for example, with your continuous integration server, and then you always have an up-to-date documentation of your application. So it's actually a living document which you can show everybody, and it's very useful for documentation purposes. Okay, so that's basically it. So there are a bunch of additional features which I haven't shown you yet because of time reasons, but you can have a look at the website, and then you will see what else can be done. But to sum up, so JGiven is actually a developer-friendly tool, and that was an important goal for us when we develop it. It should be really something which a developer likes to use and doesn't add additional overhead when the tests are developed. It allows you to formulate your scenarios in a highly modular way, and it allows you also to reuse test code. This is what's really important for us, and it really works nicely. It's just Java, so you don't need Groovy or Scala. You can just immediately use it in your Java project without learning a new language or requiring additional tools in your test infrastructure. Yeah, you can easily integrate it into existing test infrastructure because it works with JUnit and it works with TestNG. You just add the new library and you can start migrating the tests. I've shown you that you can even partially migrate your tests, and that's really a nice way to, if you have legacy tests, to move to the BDD approach. It's actually open source, so it's under the Apache 2 license, so you can just download it and use it immediately. There are Maven and Jenkins plugins, and there is also a Gradle plugin currently under development, but you can also just use it, just call the HTML reporter. It's just a Java file which you can execute. And the good thing is that the domain experts can finally read the scenario reports that are generated by JGiven, and you can use it as a documentation and collaboration tool. Yeah, so that's the main thing about BDD, is that you can that developers and domain experts can collaborate, and the way you do that is by using these scenarios, and these are really the basis for your communication, actually. The only thing that you cannot do is with JGiven, and this is something which you can do with Cucumber, for example, is that a domain expert can actually write scenarios on their own. And this is not possible in JGiven because developers have to write them. So if you are in a situation that you have a domain expert which actually want to write scenarios, then it's not a framework or a library that you can use here. But in my experience, in most projects, it's typically that the developers write the scenarios. And in this case, you shouldn't use a framework which has an additional overhead. And instead, you should use the developer-friendly tool. And finally, in fact, a domain expert can write the scenarios in any tool that the domain expert wants. You can write it in Word, in Jira, it doesn't matter. In the end, the developer can just translate the scenario in Java code in a very fast way. So in the end, it's not really a big issue, in my opinion. Okay, so thank you for your attention. And yeah, if you need more or want more information, you can go to the JGiven.org site, send me a note on Twitter, or go to the GitHub page and open an issue or whatever you want, ask questions, or afterwards. I'm also here for the whole week, so if you have any questions, then I'm happy to answer them. So thank you, and yeah. So time's up. Maybe if there's one question, I think we can get it. Otherwise, it's afterwards. Come down to me. Okay, I don't see any question now. Then come just down afterwards. Okay, thank you.